Welcome to the Freedom from Mold podcast. I'm your host, Sven Hosford. This podcast and the website are for mold survivors. I bring you my curated list of products, services, and professionals that help us continue to survive and even thrive. Sometimes these are products, services, or professionals that are directly related to mold, such as products to remediate your home or your body or your clothes. And sometimes they're just good healing practices that are especially good for people who've been toxed by mold. This is one of those podcasts. We're going to talk about protecting your mental and emotional health. You see, part of the trauma of mold poisoning is that so few people really understand or even believe what you're going through. Legal options are limited for renters because the local departments of health have no real understanding of the dangers of mold. Neither does the medical establishment. They're largely clueless about how to treat mold poisoning. But the worst is when your own family and friends don't believe what you're going through. They just don't believe it. They can evolve from disbelief to mockery to outright harassment and abuse. You're already suffering physically. You might have drained your finances and are suffering financially. And the people you normally turn to for support turn their back on you, or worse. Many of us mold survivors have had to disengage from family, friends, or professionals in our business network. Whether you call it ghosting, estrangement, or disengaging, it is often much healthier for our mental and emotional health to not talk to or communicate with certain people. This is a difficult decision to make and often leaves us distraught, grieving, and feeling very alone. And that's why I've asked my good friend Sara Makin to speak with us today. She's the founder and CEO of Makin Wellness, a mental health practice here in Pittsburgh, and they have the highest rated online therapists and counselors in Pennsylvania. She is also an Amazon best-selling author and is quite simply the best mental health professional I have ever worked with. And believe me, I've worked with a few. So here's my conversation with Sara Makin. Well, we're talking with Sara Makin today, and she is a mental health expert. She's a best-selling author, and now she has her own podcast too. Hi, Sara. Tell me about your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me on, Sven. So our podcast is Makin Wellness Podcast, and we talk about mental health, addiction, and relationships. And we bring on different guests everywhere, from anything from entrepreneurs to professional athletes to mental health and relationship experts. And with this podcast, we are sharing information about how people can improve various facets of their life.
One of the things I'm really impressed by you is your commitment to helping everyone be the best person they can be on every level, mentally, emotionally, financially, and so forth. And that relationships are really one of the main focuses of your practice, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk today about primarily one thing, but a lot of people who have been toxed by mold suffer from depression, from anxiety, from panic attacks. But specifically, I think the thing that hurts the most is when the people that you think will have your back turn their back on you. And to have to be removed by other people, ghosted, whatever you want to call it, or to have to disengage from people because of their being toxic. That's probably the most painful part of the mental health issues around mold. So let's get a few definitions. Tell me, what would be your definition of a toxic relationship?
Well, toxic relationships are characterized by lack of trust, controlling behaviors, and frequently occurring lying. And many times a partner will prioritize themselves rather than looking at you and your partner as a team. And there are times where if both members of the relationship are willing and able to work on healing and moving forward, like, it is possible for relationship dynamic to change, but many times it doesn't happen. So that is the definition of a toxic relationship.
What are some of the causes of why relationships turn toxic?
That is a great question. It can be a lot of different things. Many times it can be unresolved personal issues from the past. It could be a lack of boundaries. It could be a lack of communication or lack of ineffective communication. And it could be not really knowing how to be in a healthy relationship, or having the lack of education as to what a healthy relationship does actually look like. So it can be a lot of different things.
Well, when people have been toxic and they're going through a lot of issues, with their house or with if they're renting or financial and medical, what is it truly healthier sometimes to just disengage from people who are causing you more stress?
Oh, absolutely. If you communicate your needs and you share what's going on and what you're feeling, and the other person is not understanding, or they might be manipulative and say, well, oh, you're too sensitive, or I didn't say that. And they end up gaslighting you, which kind of can make you think that you're kind of losing it when you really aren't. They're just manipulating you. So that's what gaslighting is.
Yeah.
And many times people in a toxic relationship are with someone that is gaslighting them. When someone gaslights another person, in their mind, they can get away with being manipulative because they think that the other person isn't catching on to what they're actually doing. And when someone feels confused or starts to question their own judgment, you can essentially manipulate them even more, which is extremely toxic and a huge red flag.
Are there key red flags or key moments when it's probably healthier to disengage, or could be a trigger for somebody who's the victim of this kind of behavior? Are there moments and times you say, okay, that's it, I have to disengage?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different red flags when it comes to toxic relationships. One red flag is contempt. So if you notice that you have a feeling that the person is acting in a way where you're starting to feel like you're worthless, or if they are like rolling their eyes at you or saying mean things, or if they're very sarcastic, or they dismiss what you are saying, and you're noticing that there's signs of contempt, that is a big red flag, and that is not a healthy relationship. The second red flag is obsession. So sometimes we've had patients who are in a toxic relationship and they sort of are obsessing over their partners. So they want constant communication. They get anxious if they don't get a text back, or if they're like left on red. So if they see that the person read their text message but they haven't responded yet, and they just kind of give up everything in their life to be with this person, and they just bend over backwards for the other person. But it's not a symbiotic relationship. It's you doing like everything for this person, and the other person isn't really doing much of anything for you. So that's another red flag. The third red flag is are unkind words. So if you and your partner are lashing out at each other verbally, if language is laced with profanity, so if they're constantly like swearing at you and saying very like mean things to you, or calling you names or belittling you, those are very toxic behaviors. And someone who really loves another person is not going to be using a lot of mean words or calling them names. So that's the third red flag. The fourth red flag is if you start to experience physical pain. So if they are hurting you, if they are doing anything like putting their hands on you or abusing you, that is a huge, huge, huge red flag of a toxic relationship. And the final red flag, and I'll just keep it at 5 just to keep it more brief, but it's possessiveness. So if one partner is controlling the other partner and has complete control of their actions, that is a huge red flag and a sign of a toxic relationship. So if one person, for instance, gets to choose of whether or not you get to go to school, if they decide what you get to wear, if they decide like what you're eating, all of those very possessive sort of behaviors are a sign of a toxic relationship. You should have the freedom to be who you are in a relationship. And if you're not, it could be a red flag that your relationship is toxic.
That's a great list of things. We'll list all that out in our blog too. Those are great points. So let's say that a person has gone ahead and disengaged, whether they want to call it ghosting or whatever. You've disengaged. You're not communicating with a person. That can cause a lot of stress and grief still. How do you come to a point of feeling good about that decision to disengage?
It can be really emotionally painful to disengage from any relationship, even if it is toxic, because when we think about someone and we're used to thinking about someone, we can go through even emotionally sort of like this withdrawal period, and it can take time for you to heal from these wounds. And one of the biggest things that I recommend for people that are in the process of getting out of a toxic relationship or are in a toxic relationship and are looking to move forward is to absolutely reach out to a therapist who can support you, who can be a objective person to speak with, and to meet with someone that can help you to make the best decision that you can possibly make and how to move forward. Because sometimes, Sven, leaving toxic relationships can actually be dangerous. If you're with someone who is physically abusive, or if you're with someone that has financial abuse or financial control over you, it can be really challenging to get out. And so having someone that you can trust, that you can talk to and develop a realistic plan to implement is really important, because with every single relationship, they're all different. And so getting out of them and healing is very different. And it's very important that you address these feelings and process what's happened with a professional, because if you don't, then there's a strong probability that you will take this baggage into your next relationship.
No, we don't want that. We
do not want that. We do not want that. So it's very important to talk to a therapist.
Even though you may feel like a lessening of your load, having disengaged from certain people, there's still a period of grief that comes on. And that's, again, where the professional is so important. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because if you talk to your friends or your loved ones, they might think like, well, what's like wrong with you? Like, you're like, you be happy for not being with this person anymore. You're in a different situation. They might not understand the grieving process. And with every end of relationship, there is a period of grieving. Sometimes certain relationships take longer to grieve and to heal from than others, but it's even more important to talk to a therapist, because they can help you with processing that grief and processing your emotions, and they're not going to judge you for it.
Yeah. And that's such a key thing. Because like you said, your friends might not understand why you're grieving somebody that was so toxic to you is not in your life. But I think if it's, it's an acquaintance or a business relationship and they just ghost you, they just turn their back and there is no engagement, there's no possibility of engagement from your side. There's very definitely a stage of grief that people go through.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And finding emotional support after a disengagement, you've talked about having finding a professional. What other sorts of self-care, or, if you can find friends that can support you, what kind of care is really important?
Mm-hmm. That is a really fantastic question, Sven. So,
it's my
yeah. Well, you're doing great.
Ask the questions here.
Yes. So there's a lot of different things that someone can do to help to promote self-care while they're in this period of transition and in this period of healing. One thing could be to journal, and not on your laptop or on your phone, but actually write out your thoughts and feelings in a physical journal, because there's something that promotes more catharsis or sort of a release of emotions whenever you actually physically write it down. So that can be a great option. And it doesn't have to be journaling several pages every single day. It could be as simple as 2 sentences if you would like. It's important to get your feelings and your thoughts out there so they're not percolating in your head. Yeah. So that's one means of promotion of self-care. Another thing that can be done is spending some time quieting your mind and meditating. There's a lot of wonderful guided meditations online that you could follow, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with meditating. Another thing that can be great is exercise. Mm-hmm. You exercise, your body releases endorphins and helps to make you feel good, and it's also good for your health as well. So you can get, even if it's just 20 minutes a day, of some form of exercise or stretching or walking. All of those things can be very helpful. And the last thing is to really consider, what do you enjoy doing? And if it's good for you and good for your health, to do more of that. We've had patients that love to golf. So part of their self-care plan is to golf once a week. You have other people that love to scrapbook or to do different types of hobbies and different things that they got out of the habit of doing while they were in the toxic relationship. So getting back into that can be very helpful. And the last thing for self-care is spending time with people that you love, especially if you slowly stopped communicating with people that you care about while you were in this toxic relationship, because that is another quite common thing that toxic partners will do, is they'll try to isolate you so you don't have your support system. Again, it's a means of being able to control you more if you're there, if they are your only means of support. So those are all things to consider and to implement.
Great suggestions. I have personally experienced that effect of when you journal and you write about what's bothering you the most. That does seem to like remove it from your own psyche and just puts it out there. That's a great suggestion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And your brain looks at things in a different way when it reads it compared to when you think about something. And many times in our brains, we do a great job at making things seem way, way worse or way, way, way more hopeless than what they actually are. And so when you write these things down and you talk to a therapist about these different things, it helps you actually access different parts of your brain, and then you're able to look at things in a slightly different way.
It's true. Rereading it a few days or a few weeks later also helps clarify that, and you go through the stage of what was I thinking?
Oh yeah.
So that really helps put it in perspective. Another great self-care really is massage. Just go get yourself a nice massage. I know a lot of people, especially if it's your personal relationship, we need to be touched. We're tactile beings, and the lack of being touched, and we've seen it through this pandemic. So many people are going nuts because they can't get a hug, and they literally have not touched another person in weeks or months. Mm-hmm. So massages also should be on that list as well, right?
Massages are phenomenal. Absolutely. Yeah. They can be very relaxing for sure. And they're especially good for people that hold tension or stress in their body. So sometimes when people get anxious or stressed out, they clench certain muscles or they tense up. So when you get a massage, it sort of, I'm not a massage expert by any means, but they can kind of break up the lactic acid sort of buildups if you're exercising, or if you have a lot of tension. There's various techniques that they can implement to help to get the tension out of your muscles by massaging them. And I don't know how they do it, but if you see someone good, they can do a really great job.
Yeah. And along with massage, I think we should throw in there any kind of energy work, Reiki or craniosacral massage. I mean, there's hundreds of different kinds of massages. And to find a really good therapist is, mental therapist and massage therapist, I think are two really good things to do when you're going through this process.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So let's talk about now, we've disengaged, we're working on our own mental health. Are there any key things to notice that maybe, or just talk about if, when, or how we might want to make a reconnection with somebody?
A reconnection with a toxic person.
Yeah. Is there ever a point where that might be an option or should be an option?
Well,
the person would have to demonstrate, I think, that they're not toxic anymore, or they've changed their attitude, or no longer being possessive or obsessive or abusive.
Yeah. So there's a cycle of abuse, and part of that cycle is, being abusive or being controlling or being toxic, and then apologizing and saying, well, I'm going to change. Things are going to be different. That was the old me. This is the new me. And then they say those things to kind of get you back in. And then the cycle continues. And that's why people stay in toxic relationships for extended periods of time, because the one person is manipulating the other person to believe that they're going to change. They're never going to change unless they absolutely want to and put in the time and the effort to, but the probability is not very high. And so if you have concerns about wanting to reach out or connect with a very toxic person that you used to be with or used to be friends with, I would suggest just keeping a list in your phone of all of the reasons why they are no longer in your life, and referring to that every time you get that urge, or like in the middle of the night or in the morning, where you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder how they're doing. And, just see what's going on, and to refer to that list before you reach out to that person, because our brains look through the past with rose-colored lenses, and we don't like to remember negative or stressful events. And so because of that, our brain can filter out all of these negative situations and things that you might not consciously really remember about why you're not with that person anymore, and just remembers the good stuff. So you need to force yourself to remind yourself of the reason why you are no longer with them. And another thing is, if it's possible to not be connected with them electronically in any way, you don't need to have their number. You do not need to be following them or connected with them on social media. And if there's certain places that they're going to be at, don't go. Don't show up somewhere where there's a strong likelihood of running into them, because they're going to throw on the charm and the charisma to get you back in that abusive cycle. And There's always a reason why certain people are no longer in our lives. And that is okay. Because you're opening up room for yourself or for healthier relationships. But until you sort of learn about the cycle of abuse, what toxic relationships are, and like how to disengage and be involved in healthy relationships, like you'll continue to experience more than likely the same pattern over and over and over again.
Right.
So that's why it's very important to learn and to heal by talking with a therapist that can help to kind of teach you these things and identify these things, especially if you have a habit of being in relationships with toxic people. It's great to have a therapist while you're in the dating process to get, again, an objective point of view as to what could potentially be going on.
For a lot of people, this is a cycle from birth. I mean, a lot of us were born to toxic parents. And so we figure like toxicity is just the way that you deal. That's how things are.
Yeah. Just because your parents experience something, and I've like probably said this thousands of times, just because your parents experience something or because you were raised a certain type of way does not mean that you were doomed and that is your destiny. Like you can change, things can change, and you can look at things differently, and you have the power to make adjustments to your life. You don't have to repeat family or generational patterns if you make the conscious decision that you want something else and that you start to act on something else. It takes a lot of conscious awareness as to what your family or what your generational patterns are. And again, this is something that can be done in therapy. There's actually different family kind of family trees that you could work on with your therapist that actually you'll create a family tree, and then in it you'll go over a lot of different things regarding relationships, addiction, mental health, different types of behaviors and different things like that. And then the therapist will actually map it out so you can physically see what the generational patterns in your family are. Yeah. And so when you have this level of awareness, it helps you to make different types of decisions if you choose to make different decisions. Like for instance, if there is a pattern of divorce in your family and you know that you are prone to that, considering, well, maybe I shouldn't like mimic and model my parents' relationship, because if I do, I'll end up getting a divorce.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's comfortable because we're used to seeing things in a certain way. And so it can be very uncomfortable, or we might not believe it to be true if we do something different. But that discomfort is always happening when you're in a period of change, especially when you think and behave differently. It's not comfortable because your brain isn't used to it. But with time, it does become more comfortable and it does become more of a habit.
I like the phrase, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone.
Oh, yes, it really does.
Yeah. And that's what I would like to encourage anyone who is suffering from mold toxicity currently or in the past, really stretch yourself, really, if you broke an arm, you would go to the emergency room and have a doctor look at you. But if somebody breaks your heart, we have doctors for that too. People like yourself, Sara.
And exactly. And not all wounds are obvious, and not all medical challenges are blatant and obvious as well. And so if you are suffering from any type of medical condition or any type of mental health or addiction or relationship sort of challenge, there's a lot of wonderful providers out there that can help you to heal and to be able to learn too, because part of the healing process is education, and to learn about what to do instead and what other options are.
Just to learn new habits, really, right?
Exactly. And to have someone to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Most people have a hard time with holding themselves accountable.
Yes. And I think part of the understanding too is that like if you break your arm, you go to a doctor, your arm heals, you don't need to go to the doctor anymore. It doesn't take a lifetime of therapy to fix some of these things. Sometimes, tell me if I'm right about this, even 2 to 3 sessions with a really good mental health therapist can be extremely beneficial. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So it all depends on what specifically is going on in the person's life and what level of support they need and what the intensity of the challenge is. There are definitely some times where a few visits is really what someone needs to help them to move forward, but oftentimes it's a bit more than that, I would say.
But it doesn't have to be daily or weekly, like sometimes once a month can be helpful.
Yeah. Once you get to a certain place of more like stability, once a month could be good.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, describing what a toxic relationship is, knowing when to get out, how to feel good about yourself once you have gotten out of those relationships, different tools for self-care and so forth, and a lot about the therapy. Is there anything we missed or any part that we should cover that you want to tell us about?
Mm-hmm. The only additional part that I would like to cover is that there is no shame about being in a situation where you are in a toxic relationship with someone. Everyone is still sort of like learning about relationships and how to be in a healthy relationship and what an ideal relationship looks like. So please don't beat yourself up or blame yourself for being in a really negative situation. When you realize you're in a toxic relationship, there's sort of this period of feeling bad about yourself and feeling bad about the situation. But what you do then is, instead of dwelling and feeling bad about yourself and what happened, you put that focus towards moving forward and healing and getting yourself out of that type of situation and learning about what red flags and different things to look out for so it doesn't happen again. So I just wanted to reiterate that there's like no shame. Like, most people have been in some form of toxic relationship or another at one point in their lives, but it's not very commonly or openly discussed. So I thank you, Sven, for bringing this to public awareness so we can talk about it and help people so they don't have to suffer unnecessarily, because there is hope. You can get out of this situation and you can heal.
Those are great words of advice, because I do know that a lot of people that are stuck in toxic relationships just blame themselves. It's all my fault. I'm not a good person, blah, blah, blah. And really anyone can get out of that spiral of negative thinking. Anyone can, yes?
Absolutely. It's possible. For some people, it takes longer than others. Especially if you have a habit of, thinking very negatively, or if you have certain patterns that have been lasting for several years, as long as you take the effort, put the energy and the effort towards change and seeing a licensed mental health therapist or someone that can really support you, like, that's really the most important thing. Beating yourself up isn't going to do anything good for you, and it's just going to make you feel bad.
That's for sure. Well, Sara, thank you so much for being with us. Let's tell people who and how can reach you. You're right now licensed in Pennsylvania.
Yes. Makin Wellness is currently licensed in Pennsylvania, and we are on a mission to help millions of people to heal and become happy again through excellent online therapy. So if you are struggling with mental health, addiction, or relational challenges, please give our team a call at 833-274-HEAL. It is 833-274-HEAL. You can also go to our website at makinwellness.com and request a session through there. We are currently licensed in Pennsylvania and are scaling out of the state. So if you are listening to a state outside of Pennsylvania, make sure you check out our website to see our most up-to-date places where we are able to serve you.
Great. And we'll have all that contact information here in the blog for this podcast as well. Well, once again, thank you, Sara. It's always a delight to speak with you.
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me on. And I really appreciate your time, Sven.
You bet. Thank you. So take heart what she says there at the end of this podcast. There is no shame in seeking help from a mental health professional. There is no stigma in asking for professional help. If you break your leg, you'd go to a medical doctor. It's no different if someone breaks your heart. I hope this podcast brings some light into whatever darkness you're going through. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy.